Okay, good morning Year 4. So today we are going to be recapping why and how we use commas in different sentences. So shortly you'll be going to the BBC Bitesize website following the link. And I just thought I'd just explain the information there in a little bit more detail because it is quite wordy. So on the BBC Bitesize website, it reminds you that in a long sentence, you can use commas to separate out extra information and make the sentence easier to read. So the first way that we use commas is in a list. So for example, if I like the colours red, blue, pink and purple, and I want to write that I like those colours in a sentence, then I would use a comma and an and. Now I'm going to follow the rule of 3. So I'm going to pick my 3 favourites out of the 4 because then it just makes our sentence just the right length if we use the power of 3. So for example, I like red, blue and purple. Now we've got the connective or the conjunction and to separate the blue and the purple, and to separate the red and the blue in our list we use a comma. So I like red, blue and purple. So the comma here kind of acts like a pause to break up the sentence, and then I need my full stop at the end. So then on the BBC Bitesize website, it then starts to talk about clauses. So it talks about a clause being a building block for a sentence. So commas can be used to break up sentences that have more than one clause and make them easier to read. So I'm going to explain that in a little bit more detail now. So we've got the sentence here, the lion followed his prey. Now this is the main clause of my sentence because it makes sense by itself. But if I wanted to put that into a more longer detailed sentence to make it more interesting and imaginative, I could add in a subordinate clause or a subclause for short. So for example, sneakily. Sneakily, the lion followed his prey. Now in this sentence here, we've got our main clause, the same as the sentence above. It makes sense by itself. The subordinate clause that I've added at the beginning doesn't make sense by itself, but it's just an extra chunk of information. The subclause is an extra chunk of information to make my sentence more interesting. So we can use a comma here to break up these 2 clauses. Now I'm going to put my comma here to separate the subclause, the extra information, and the main clause, the main chunk of the sentence that makes sense by itself. So we don't need a full stop in between these clauses because they are closely connected. Sneakily is the fronted adverbial describing how the lion is following his prey. So we don't want a full stop there. We just have a comma to just separate the sentence so that it just looks and sounds better when we read it. Okay, so just to give a few more examples, I've written some main clauses here in blue. Mrs. Chaplin made a cup of tea. It's the main clause of a sentence because it makes sense by itself. Mrs. Worrell ate breakfast. Mr. McMullen went for a run. And over here in red, I've written some subclauses, so extra chunks of information that I could add to my main clause to make a sentence, but these subclauses don't make sense by themselves. As quick as a flash. Early that morning, feeling tired. So we can have a play around with these now. So we can pick a subclause that can go at the beginning or at the end of my sentence. So I'm going to choose feeling tired. Feeling tired Mrs. Chaplin made a cup of tea. So I've got my main clause, the main chunk of the sentence that makes sense by itself, and my subordinate clause, my subclause, that's an extra bit of information. So where are we going to put the comma? We're going to put the comma in the middle of the two clauses, subclause and the main clause. So it reads like this. Feeling tired, Mrs. Chaplin made a cup of tea. Now we can also put a subclause or a subordinate clause at the end of a sentence. So I'm going to choose another main clause now. Mrs. Worrell ate breakfast early that morning. So where am I going to put my comma? I'm going to put it in the middle of the main clause and the subordinate clause. Now, some of you may have noticed that I've forgotten something very important at the end of both of these sentences. We must make sure we always remember our full stop. Okay, then the activity 4, you are going to be looking at embedded clauses. Now, embedded clauses are very similar to subordinate clauses, but this time we simply put the subclause in the middle of a sentence. So we call it an embedded clause because it's embedded in the middle of a sentence. So for example, the lion followed his prey. That's my main clause, but this time I want to put my subordinate clause right in the middle of that main clause. So it's called an embedded clause. The lion followed his prey. In the middle, I'm going to put slowly and stealthily. Now I'm going to put my comma before my embedded clause and after my embedded clause. So it reads like this. The lion slowly and stealthily followed his prey. So you can see, like the previous examples, the commas act like a pause. They help to break up a wordy sentence. The lion slowly and stealthily followed his prey. So hopefully that explains a little bit more what you will read on the BBC Bite-Size website. I didn't want people to get confused with the vocabulary such as clause, main clause, subordinate clause. We learnt about these words quite early on in the year, so hopefully that's helped to recap, and we look forward to seeing how you get on with the worksheet. Bye.